We are here with Becky from ECC Labs. Becky, if you'd like to tell them a little bit about yourself, and we'll go from there.
Yep, so we are one of the few cannabis testing labs in Virginia. We started out in Blacksburg, and that was just happened to be where I was living at the time, wanted to get involved. You know, the hemp industry was just starting where farmers were going to start growing that year. That was 2019. So, you know, the beginning of 2019, I found a lab, a little small, tiny space that I could sublease at the Corporate Research Center at Virginia Tech, and kind of got our method up with just a bare bones HPLC, you know, and kind of built our industry from there, or built our business from there, working with farmers primarily, doing, you know, really regulatory testing where they were all looking for the 0.3% THC level. And so trying to figure out when to harvest, or just get an idea of what kind of CBD levels were in their plants. It was, you know, the very, you know, start of kind of the mainstream folks being able to participate in the cannabis industry.
Right. What drove you into the industry, however, though?
I just kind of an interest. My background is chemical engineering, and I did a lot with biodiesel, which is another really highly regulated industry, just being in the, you know, transportation fuels. And so I ran a quality control lab for a biodiesel facility, you know, many years ago. So that kind of the science part of it, the, you know, the processing part of it, which came later. It wasn't as much the farming piece quite yet, but so that kind of interested me, and then just, you know, wanting to be involved, you know, because I do believe in, you know, cannabis being something that's beneficial, you know, on the industrial side for, you know, clothing and fiber and food, which is, you know, often sometimes overshadowed by the CBD side for the health benefits. And so just wanting to be involved, you know, and wanting to start my own business and having that experience and feeling like I could fill that need that was here in Virginia.
Oh, that's great, and I think that is key for every business owner, is filling a space where you're valued, you believe you can provide value, where you believe your need is needed. You know, that's awesome. That's great. So now you're chasing your dreams.
Yeah. Well, and it's been, I mean, it's you know, it's been an exciting 2 years for us. You know, really starting with those farmers and building those relationships and understanding the chemistry of all of it, and moving into, you know, the market now versus, you know, when we first started has just exploded in Virginia.
Yeah, through the hemp and now with the upcoming THC bill, everything seems to be going a little crazy right now. Infusions are going every which way and stuff like that. So no, that's pretty cool. So at the lab, what are you utilizing now to do your testing? What machinery?
So we have, you know, our workhorse in the lab is of course our HPLC. That's sort of the standard issue for how you would test cannabinoids. Okay. And that's, you know, the most common instrument is an HPLC. Some people use a GC-MS or some other sort of mass spec, but you know, pretty standard industry expectation is HPLC. So that's runs every day, all the time. And then as we grew, we acquired, you know, several more instruments, a GC-MS, which is for terpenes and residual solvents. So any of those volatile compounds that can, you know, off gas from your plant or your products. We also have an ICP-MS, which is for heavy metals. Okay. And so that's another kind of workhorse in our lab. And then we have an LC-MS-MS, which is for testing pesticides and mycotoxins.
Gotcha. A lot of acronyms here.
There's a lot, and it's all, you know, anytime you hear that C, it's chromatography. And so that's really, you know, liquid chromatography or gas chromatography, and then mass spec is really a very common detection method.
Got you. So you have 4 different pieces of machinery.
Well, and then we have a microbial side.
Okay, now you
so
got
we
5.
have some other,
Okay,
you know,
gotcha.
we do plate counting, which is sort of a very traditional way, you know, the standard issue for how you test microbial. You know, any testing you're doing for the federal government, will, you know, USP, United States Pharmacopoeia, their methods are all plate-based, but, you know, there's been developments, and so they also have something called PCR, which is polymerase chain reactions, and so that can test based off of DNA, and it can do it much more quickly.
Oh, got you. So you can actually possibly take something mid-grow and see which route it's going down, which...
No, we can see if there's DNA of microbial contaminants in there.
Okay.
There are some uses of a PCR that they can test like the sex of the plant. So they do have some kind of indicators that you can get, but whether we have not really delved into that, it's not necessarily worth it, I think, sometimes.
Okay.
But that's really, we use that more for contaminant testing, so microbial contaminants.
Got you. Well, talking about microbials, let's go right into them. Microbial contaminants, how do they usually get into the product?
You know, it's a plant, it's growing outside or inside. That's, you know, there is microbes everywhere in our world, and especially on plants. You know, there's typically some level on fresh plants, as you know, that's just what the world we live in is full of microbes.
Right.
A lot of times when they're dried and cured, you know, that cuts back anything like processing it, turning it into an extract or a finished product. Is really will kill any of those microbes. So we have, just to kind of give you an example, we have a smokable flower package where we test for all the cannabinoids and contaminants and a microbial contaminant.
Right.
We also have a biomass package for people who are doing really just planning to process it. Usually that's use heat or some other way that'll kill microbes, and we don't test it. So we don't always recommend testing if you're going to process it, because, you know, that's not gonna, if you're looking at microbes before you go through this production, you know, that's not really a good indicator of what's gonna come out the back end.
Okay.
Other things like growing conditions, especially for things like fungus and mold. You know, I've talked to people I'm from Louisiana, and I've been talking to some folks down there where it's super sticky and humid, and there's, you know, fungus and mold grows all over everything. And so, you know, I think there's some conditions up here in Virginia as well where it's just, if it's really wet and rainy, you know, if you think about growing anything, you know, if there's not enough airflow through your plants, they're not spaced far enough apart, you know, so that's the kind of places where you might see microbial contaminants come in.
During the flowering season, so it gets right into that bud, just doesn't have a chance to dry out.
Yep.
Provides a nice little home for the mold to grow.
That's what, you know, and the other kind of tests that we can run and a lot of labs can run is called water activity, and especially for things like, you know, something that you're selling as a smokable product, where it tells you how much water is available for the microbes to grow.
Okay.
And so it's, you know, moisture is just strictly how much water is in that material. Water activity says how much water is available for microbes to grow in. And I think that as, you know, more regulations come online that match food safety type regulations, because really ultimately what we're looking at is a lot of similarity between testing food products and cannabis products, because a lot of them are food.
It is, and I believe they should go through the same testing and regulations, definitely.
Yep.
And so that's really a huge importance with testing now with THC about to come on the market. Testing the material is very important for potency by itself, let alone for the other tests that you can run on them. But going from a 5 milligram to 10 milligram per dose, which seems relatively harmless, it makes a huge difference, and could mean the difference between a slight buzz and a possible freak out trip to the emergency room.
Right.
So a lot of people out here, they don't have access. This is the problem with the bill that just passes, is the access. It does allow them access to grow their own, which is great. You should, have complete control over what you're going to consume, especially if it can possibly have adverse effects.
Yep.
Now the problem is not knowing how potent that product is going to be.
That is going to be an issue. Although if you think about it, if you're growing tomatoes in your backyard or lettuce, if you have a garden in your backyard, it doesn't require the same amount of testing because you're closer to that plant that's being grown, so you have more knowledge about what went into it. So that's the contaminant testing part that kind of speaks to that. I think the potency part, come July 1st here, it's not a requirement for people to be testing the potency of their plant material, and I agree with that. I mean, if you're consuming it, you grew it, you can monitor yourself to, smoke a whole lot or not, or bake something that's got a lot of it in it or not.
Right.
I think that the challenge and the safety issue is going to come in is if you start giving that away to other people that don't understand it, or if you start, the black market's coming on, and so just being careful about, are you getting something from somebody that has had it tested, or not.
Right.
And so I think that it's really when you start sharing that, and if it's your friend or your, your mom or dad, then that's.
However, one person's tolerance is, not the same for another individual. Some person can tolerate, the effects fairly well, and it's going to affect somebody else significantly different.
Right.
I think not having complete control of your own product and being able to sample it little by little and knowing how to titrate your own self, whenever it gets into trading or that type of thing, I encourage people to really know what the potency is. That way it's easier to dose. Smoking, it's not that hard to self-titrate. Right. You can stop inhaling at any time that you feel a little too strong of a buzz coming on. Eating it, however, you eat something you're not going to know until almost an hour later, sometimes longer with some people. Right. And at that point, it's nothing you could do. You've consumed too much. Now you just have to sit down and hold on and hope for the best. Right. Yeah, it's not a pleasurable thing to do.
And that's what, I see as the industry is starting, as it's written now, we have about, 2 to 3 years before large production of marijuana is going to be seen on the market, retail. And that's really when I'm not as worried about, they are going to have regulations that they need to fulfill with testing. It is that first wave of folks, and there's a lot of, the way it's written, gifting, like in DC, is that going to be, I see a large black market coming on in Virginia. I don't know if I should be talking about but I mean, that's the reality of it.
The reality of it is, yes, the only access that they really left people to was to cultivate their own.
Right.
And
people are going to get, that's, I do see people gifting it and giving it away. Maybe not, but like more to like your friend, you're going to share.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. It's when you don't know anybody is when it becomes a problem.
And that is, we do that kind of testing, that was sort of like people getting started in the hemp side of things, where, there was a lot of people who were smaller, and now they're mid-size maybe, hemp CBD processors, and they kind of went through the same thing where they were working at their kitchen table and some of them were getting it tested and some of them weren't. And so I see that that's going to be, we would always encourage it, but it's not a requirement. And it really depends on if you're consuming it yourself or you're giving it away, are you making a
or
salve?
retailing it.
Or retailing it, right? Are you making a salve? That doesn't need quite as much contaminant testing as if you're making an edible.
Right. Now, with the contaminants, how concerning is it for somebody consuming an edible with possible contaminants in there?
It's pretty concerning. The risk of it being there is probably not huge if you know where it's being grown or you know who's growing it and making the product. So the risk of it being there is, not astronomically huge, but if you do consume something that has things that have been shown and proven to be, toxic to the human body, then you could get very ill. And that's what there was a lot of, 2 years ago with all the vape scares, and they found pesticides in all of these items, and so.
Sure.
So that's certainly a concern, and it's really, the other concern there being almost more the political side, where if somebody gets hurt and they're not testing, well, then that's just another reason for all the people who aren't for this, plant becoming more accessible. That's something that they can point to. It'll hurt the industry overall.
Right.
If you're not really sure of what you're doing and that what you're putting out there is not full of contaminants.
Right,
So,
right. And I think that's a large concern with the pesticides, insecticides, and things like that, especially when you're concentrating it down into an edible form or something like that.
Yep.
Now you're concentrating more of that insecticide, pesticide
Yep.
residue into that edible form.
And we haven't seen a lot, of all the samples we've tested, we've probably tested over 4,000 samples in the past 2 years. We don't often see pesticides. We would see them, in outdoor grows. Mm-hmm. We would sometimes see them, pesticides, even if you're not using it. If it's in your soil, same with heavy metals. If it's in the soil, these plants are great bioaccumulators where they'll just suck it all up and hold on to it. Mm-hmm. So we do see heavy metals at very low levels. We do, especially in outdoor grow type situations. When we're testing the plant, usually by the time that gets down into a product level, it's dilute enough that that's even lower. I don't know if we've ever had a failing in terms of the Virginia limits.
Okay.
So I don't know if we've ever had a fail on the heavy metal side. Pesticides, we've seen a little bit of that, just being outdoors especially, we've gotten hits on those. There's some, we haven't, on things like indoor grow, we haven't seen a lot of that because it's just a more controlled environment.
Gotcha. I'm going to jump into Delta 8 really quick.
Okay.
Because I'm curious. On what you've tested, the amounts of Delta 8 that show up in products, how much actually really shows up, Delta 8, for usable distillate?
On products that are specifically made to be Delta 8 products or on other products?
From like CBD?
We don't see a lot of Delta 8 showing up in CBD products. It's
well,
just
no. As far as like the CBD flower. So if somebody brings you a CBD flower and you test it and they want to know the potencies, I'm curious as to where that Delta 8 is at, because that's technically the only way that you're supposed to get Delta 8 is through a CBD flower, and you're able to distill it because there's enough in there for you to distill. So I'm curious from a lab, how much is actually in this flower for you to distill?
A very minor amount. It would be not financially viable to get the amount of Delta 8 for a product from extracting it from plant material.
Wow, that is so bizarre because I get phone calls that tell me all the time otherwise.
I mean, that's the reality of Delta 8, which probably most of you guys know, is that it is processed from, CBD oil. So it is made, I haven't seen a production of Delta 8. I've seen a lot of productions.
Very few people have actually seen this production.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of production facilities of CBD and even marijuana, but I have not seen the actual process. I do have a general idea of how it works. Mm-hmm. And really, if you look back at the original patent, it was to make Delta 8 and Delta 9 out of CBD oil. And now you can definitely tweak it, and I know that, I know some folks who are, very reputable and have done their due diligence to really understand that process and to get it to really be Delta 8. The legality of that it's in a gray area, so I can't comment on that because it's a gray, the way they define hemp in the Farm Bill. Some people, I can see where it would make sense that it's included. I can also see where it would make sense that it's kind of stretching it a little bit to say that. But I do know there are some people who are making high quality Delta 8, but there's also a lot of people that there's a big question mark around it. Is it being tested? Does it have Delta 9, or is that shift in the chromatography? Are labs just saying, oh, it's not, it's a little bit of a shift, so none of it's there. And the reality is that when you see a peak, which represents the amount of a cannabinoid, that peak that's saying it's not Delta 9, some of it probably is in a lot of situations. And so I think that to make a Delta 8 compliant, safe product is challenging, not impossible, and there are people who are doing it, but it's not, it takes some work. And there's a lot of product out there that is not falling under that high quality of Delta 8.
Yeah. No, that's fine. I was just curious.
Yeah.
I said, from all the lab reports that I get back on our material, I never see any discernible amount of Delta 8 showing up in my potency test. It's like, wow, somebody must have this magical bud out there that just has a lot of Delta 8 showing up.
All right.
I'm coming for you guys.
The magical bud is a chemistry lab or a production lab. So there's a lot of controversy around Delta 8, and it's hard to know which is going to come out in the wash.
So, THC, CBD, you test both, right?
We do.
All right, flower. We're talking flower specifically here.
Okay.
I'm curious. And you may not know, but terpenes in THC versus terpenes in CBD. Is there one that shows up more dominant on the THC side of things than on the CBD side of things?
It's not as much about whether you're looking at a cannabis plant that has more than 0.3% THC or less, because that's really the CBD versus, the hemp versus marijuana.
There you go.
It's a lot more about the variety that's growing. And so there's some, whether cannabis plants that have a lot more of the terpenes that, are used for things like sleep or, mood stabilizing and things like that versus, there's other terpenes that give you energy or, kind of get you a little bit more wide-eyed. And the split is not as much between, marijuana versus hemp. It's more about the variety, the specific varieties that are being grown out there.
Understood. And I think that really comes down to the terpenes from what we're seeing with our varieties and the terpene profiles that we have. The terpenes seem to be very similar across most of the CBD varieties right now. Mm-hmm. They're starting to widen as some of the crosses now, because CBD really hasn't been the most popular female in the field. Now that the crosses are coming from the THC side of things, because the THC has such a vast array of terpenes in all of their variants.
Right.
They're starting to add different varieties now to that CBD to try and bring in some of those terpenes and stuff.
I mean, and I'm not sure about this, but it seems like, I mean, they've been working on building those terpene profiles in marijuana out west for a long time. I mean, for, longer even before that it was legal. I mean, people have been really developing those strains and crossing them to make these, beautiful bouquets that help, help with this ailment versus that, or help, relax you or stimulate you.
Right.
So I think that, I think that would be great if we can bring in some of that knowledge, to the hemp side of it and help to develop other bouquets with them.
Coming soon, guys.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly what, the thing that makes, the impact to your body or your mind by consuming these products is hugely impacted by the terpenes. And so that's...
I'm so glad you said that, because people just come in looking for either THC or CBD, and I try and explain it's so much more than that. So much more than that.
And actually, the pharmaceutical processors here, that's one of the required tests. And on their product label, they all have their terpene profile listed out.
Oh, that's great.
So
that's great. So the terpenes, the importance of them, full spectrum, broad spectrum, isolate.
So they're, terpenes are volatile compounds, so they will come off of, they'll turn into gases and float away, at some point. The more processing you do, so that's, as you do more processing from full to broad to isolate, the more you're going to lose. The more heat you use in your processing, the more you're going to lose. And so I know that there's different methods of creating whatever product or extract, that will retain more of the terpenes. And I know that that's a lot of the technology is trying to do that. If you look out there, at what folks are selling, I've seen websites that say, this product with cannabis-infused terpenes and this product with other terpenes that they get from other either natural places like lemon peels or lavender.
Does that
versus
matter?
Synthetic.
Does that matter?
This might be a little controversial, but to me, if it's a naturally occurring terpene, the molecule is the same.
Right.
So the molecule is exactly the same whether you get it from a cannabis plant or a lavender plant. That is the same linalool terpene is in there.
The molecular structure is identical.
The same. Synthetic terpenes, I'm not, that leaves a little bit more of a question mark in my mind. I think the thing that makes, if you pull all the terpenes out of a cannabis plant or a lavender plant, it's really the ratios and the symbiotic nature of how one works with the other. And so it's hard for a production to recreate exactly, because there's some minor terpenes in there that you may not even test on a level or detect at the level that you can, that are having an impact. So I think that's where the benefit of keeping the terpenes with the plant or with the product that came with it, kind of as it was grown, comes from. On the flip side, if you're a larger production facility and you're trying to make something that fits within like regulation guidelines, and your recipe says it has this percent of, this terpene, this percent of myrcene, this percent of linalool, this percent of each of these different terpenes, then it's harder to guarantee that, because a plant growing is going to, it's not going to be exactly the same.
Sure.
It's not a ditto copy of each other.
Even the clones will change ever so slightly in the environment.
Temperature, environment, all that stuff. So I think that there's, I've always been the entourage effect, been a proponent of really believing that that's beneficial, because there's even minor things that we're not able to detect.
Yet. We only know what we know right now, right?
Right. So, but I also see the benefit in, if we can figure out what this profile looks like, you know, and then you're trying to make it to serve a larger population of people, because not everybody's going to be able to do this on their own in their kitchen.
Right.
You know, if you're trying to serve the masses, then I think that if you can get as close to that as you can, that's a benefit.
You have an idea, right?
Yeah. But versus if you're using a terpene from exactly that plant that you grew versus a terpene, you know, that came from another natural place.
Right, just to induce, say, certain things like sleepiness, going back to linalool or myrcene or something like that. Just to, and you can use those two isolated terpenes in order to induce that type of an effect. Right. However, you may be missing out on some other things that we don't see internally from either the plant or in ourselves that is doing a much better job than just providing help with sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
So.
Thank you, Becky. I appreciate you coming in today.
Problem.
It was awesome having you.
Yeah, thank you.
Becky, ECC Labs. Thank you.
Come check us out.